right after the latest famous terrorist atrocity, Charlie Hebdo, the head of the Israeli Labor Party, Isaac Herzog, he's the prime opponent of Netanyahu in the upcoming election, was quoted as saying, "Terrorism is terrorism. There are no two ways about it." That's quite wrong. There are two ways about it, and we know about it very well. We look quite differently at the retail terrorism that's done by them against us as compared with the wholesale terrorism that we carry out against them, which doesn't count. That's this observation is one of the most richly documented and well-established results in the large-scale study of terrorism in the past 30 years, ever since Ronald Reagan declared a war on terror as he came into office. Well, this usual, incidentally, it's hardly a new observation. So George Orwell defined what he called the nationalist. He said, "The nationalist not only does not disapprove of atrocities committed by his own side, but he has a remarkable capacity for not even hearing about them." And Orwell didn't go far enough. We also have a remarkable capacity for denying them or even lauding them, case after case. And this usual pattern was followed after the latest atrocity in Paris. The crime was vividly reported by the veteran Europe correspondent of the New York Times, Stephen Erlanger. He described the aftermath as a day of sirens, helicopters in the air, frantic news bulletins, police cordons, anxious crowds, young children led away from schools to safety. It was a day like the previous two of blood and horror in and around Paris. And Erlanger also quoted a surviving journalist who said, "Everything crashed. There was no way out. There was smoke everywhere. It was terrible. People were screaming. It was like a nightmare. There was a huge detonation, and everything went dark." Erlanger comments, the scene was an increasingly familiar one of smashed glass, broken walls, twisted timbers, scorched paint, and emotional devastation. As some of you may recognize, I'm cheating. That was not his report after the Paris Charlie Hebdo bombing. Rather, this was April 24th, 1999. Didn't make it to the front page. It was buried in an inside page. It wasn't terribly important. It was the U.S. Missile attack on Serbian state television. Headquarters knocked the radio television station off the air. It killed 16 journalists, several more than Charlie Hebdo. And Erlanger reports that American officials defended the attack as an attempt to undermine, his words, an effort to undermine the government that the U.S. was attacking, and therefore the radio television station was a legitimate target. Richard Holbrooke, distinguished diplomat, he was then the envoy to Yugoslavia. He described the successful attack as an enormously important and, I think, positive development. It was echoed by many others. There was an international, still is international tribunal for a criminal tribunal for Yugoslavia. They were asked by some Canadian lawyers to look into the NATO attack, and they concluded that it was not a crime. But they did say, I'll quote them, that civilian casualties were unfortunately high, but they do not appear to be clearly disproportionate. That's in contrast to Charlie Hebdo, where obviously they were very much proportionate. I don't know proportionate to what, but that's the quote. Well, let's go back to Chris Kyle. Some of his exploits were in Fallujah during the Marine attack on Fallujah in November 2004. One of the worst war crimes of the invasion itself, the worst war crime of the millennium. Here it's regarded as an example of marvelous heroism of our soldiers in liberating Iraq. If you go back to the reporting of the Fallujah attack, it's extremely interesting. I happened to be in New York when it took place. I had some talks. I stopped all the talks, and each day just talked about the front page of the New York Times. The first day of the attack, the front page of the New York Times had a big picture, right in the front page, of a hospital. The Marines had attacked a hospital, which is, of course, a war crime. They had thrown, what the picture showed, the photograph showed, is that they had thrown the patients out of their beds and onto the floor, tied their hands behind their backs, done the same with doctors. There were some questions about it. The reporters asked, why attack the hospital? And they were told that the hospital was a legitimate target. The reason was that it was producing propaganda for the rebels, namely casualty figures. So therefore it was entirely legitimate to destroy this, to prevent this propaganda agency from continuing to spew forth its violent materials. Really easy to continue. I won't go on, but you should be able to add many more examples. One of the more interesting comments on Charlie Hebdo crime was by a noted civil rights lawyer, noted for his vigorous defense of freedom of expression, Floyd Abrams. He sharply condemned the editors of the New York Times because they didn't publish the Charlie Hebdo cartoons ridiculing Muhammad that elicited the terrorist assault. And that, he said, if they had done so, it would have properly served the cause of free expression in the immediate wake of the most threatening assault on journalism in living memory. He's actually right. The Charlie Hebdo attack was the most threatening assault on journalism in living memory. That's actually a comment on living memory and on us. Living memory is a category that is very carefully crafted, that we craft very carefully to include their crimes against us and to exclude scrupulously our crimes against them, comparable crimes, often worse crimes. These are not crimes. They're noble defense of the highest values. Maybe sometimes they're inadvertently flawed, like when, unfortunately, civilian casualties were high but not disproportionate. Well, all of this is a special case of a much more general doctrine, which is observed with really impressive dedication and consistency, namely, the more we can blame some crime on some enemy, the greater the outrage. The more we are responsible for it, and therefore incidentally can do something about it, to end it, the less the concern, sometimes tending to oblivion or even denial.